Hey everyone, welcome to Neighbor Science, the only podcast about political economy and anime. I'm Ryan Salisbury, and today we have our old co-host Kris.
Hey, it's me.
And frequent guest Una.
Hi.
I think we can call Una a co-host as well. I think you've been on enough episodes to warrant that.
I can't be on two podcasts at once.
I think a lot of people are, but that's okay. And Kris obviously does not. He is not prioritizing my anime podcast since he is late.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I was prioritizing, trivial shit like mental health.
Set out your life, man. What the fuck?
Yeah, right.
You got to be here talking about anime instead of being outside in nature enjoying the sun. Fuck that.
Yeah. Oh no. What kind of goth am I?
I know. And we're talking about something very important today. We're talking about Golden Kamuy, the anime about 1910s Japan.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know why I had to specify Japan. It's a fucking anime. But anyway, it's very popular and acclaimed anime. It takes place after the Russo-Japanese War, which I'm hoping Kris can give a little background on. I know a very tiny amount, but not enough to sound very intelligent about it. Just the overarching plot of it is that Ainu, one of the minority ethnic groups of Japan, amassed a huge fortune of gold by mining the rivers of Hokkaido, which is like the not the northernmost, but the second largest island of Japan. And unfortunately, the placer mining techniques they use, which is like mining rivers, is devastating to river ecologies, which meant that their most important food source, which is salmon, became scarce. And so the gold was viewed as a curse and hidden away in their mining operations. Oh, wait, I skipped a whole part, didn't I? They mined a huge fortune of gold. And so returning back, the gold they mined was viewed as a curse and hidden away, and the mining operations were shut down. And so the story starts when someone named Noparabo killed several of the last Ainu who knew where the gold was. He was sent to Abashiri prison, which is like the maximum security prison of Japan at the time. And while he was there, he created a map to the gold's location by tattooing it on prisoners' bodies. The guards caught wind of it, and they tried to move the prisoners to another facility, which allowed a political prisoner, one of the last samurai, to kill the guards and let all of the prisoners escape. And so the main characters, Sugimoto Saishi and Asirpa, who's an Ainu girl, are looking for the gold. In the very first episode, they get the first tattoo map piece, which they have to use by skinning the person that it's on because of the way that it's tattooed, which was a nice, like, dark introduction to the show.
Right. Really gives you a hint as to the tone of the story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think we're just going to cover the first 50 chapters or so because Una got distracted and Kris only recently started and only made it to around that point. So even though I'm on chapter like 182 now or something like that, we'll just do the first 50. I want to come back to the show anyway. Because there's like a lot that we could talk about with it. And I think most of this episode is actually going to be talking about like the various ethnic minorities of Japan and the history of Japan around this time. But one thing I did want to mention first is this gold that they're chasing after, it's hard to understand like how much gold there is, how much gold it is rather. Because, like in a heist movie, it's like, the casino's vault has, $40 million in it or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's very straightforward. But for this, they say it's 20 kan of gold. What the fuck is a kan? It's a unit of mass, like a more traditional unit of mass in Japan.
Yeah.
It's around 75 kilograms of gold, the 20 kan, which is a lot.
Yeah.
And I found that at that time, 1,000 yen was worth about 25 ounces of gold. Mm-hmm. And so in the 1910 Japanese units, 20 con of gold would be about 110,000 yen. Today, that's only like $1,100.
Right.
Because the yen prices have deflated like a lot during the 30s and after World War II.
Right.
But in US dollars of today, using the spot price of $1,700 an ounce for gold, it would be about $4.5 million.
So, pocket change.
Yeah, decent amount of money. And we actually find out later. I don't know if either of you have gotten to this point, but because I watched the episodes kind of out of order to refresh myself. But at one point, they find out that the actual amount of gold they're looking for is around 20,000 con. So it would actually be about $4.5 billion that they're looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was like, oh shit. And of course, then everybody gets fucking gold fever even harder.
Yes. So let's just start with y'all's impressions. Kris, what did you think, since you're pretty fresh off of watching it?
Yeah, I think I'm really enjoying it. I really want to keep watching this show. I appreciate. I actually tweeted about this. I was like, this show is basically designed for somebody with my kind of brain, because it's got a bunch of cool like ethno-cultural trivia and stuff. It's pretty gothic in this kind of like, late Meiji style. And just other stuff like, it involves people with weird tattoos. It involves like weird, like nature philosophy and like hunter thoughts and shit like that, that is just like fun to kind of interact with mentally. I really appreciate Asirpa's really cute and fun and like an interesting character. And the others are generally interesting. I do get a little confused sometimes, like who's who of the various veterans, because they all wear the fucking uniform and stuff. And so like, you're like, oh, is this like for a minute, you're like, is this Tanigaki or the other guy? Like,
right. You basically have to go by their eyebrows.
Exactly, right. You're like, this guy's slightly hairier, or he has that funny line on his cheek or whatever it is. Yeah. But it's pretty fun. But it is interesting because like, if you think about the effort behind like training and equipping and uniforming like, modern soldiers, right? Modern armies, like they're supposed to be kind of uniform and hard to distinguish. And I think that part of the story is like these guys who come back from war and then they're like, what do we do next, right? Some of them stay in line behind, what's his name? The crazy guy with the broken skull.
Tsurumi, yeah.
Yeah. And, some of them just kind of keep falling in line behind him. And others, like our friends, our main characters, are mostly trying to just figure out their life as veterans out here in the kind of Japanese frontier, if you will. And so I really appreciate that that's, whether it was intended specifically that way or not, that's kind of part of the part of my interpretation anyway of what's going on there. And also just like the fact that like the Ainu village that you see a lot of the story take place in and around, you can see that they're backed into a corner, which is really sad because it's so often the case for, indigenous people in an imperial setting. And yet at the same time, it shows like they have a quality of life and, sets of customs and like the funny, like intercultural exchanges between Asirpa and, what's the main character's name? I cannot remember.
Sugimoto.
Sugimoto, that's right. Sorry. There's so many different people with similar names in this show.
It's harder to remember Japanese names, we don't have as much of a reference for it. I still don't remember all the characters' names. I've watched the show twice now.
Right. It's like, is it Johnny or Johnny Bob or John or Jonathan? It's like that, So, but I appreciate like a lot of their intercultural exchanges where it's like, oh, I don't know if I want to eat that brain, and then he tries it and he's like, okay, I guess it's not bad. Or it's like, I'm just going to just tolerate it. and then she thinks that miso is literal shit, and
Yeah.
all this. So you're like watching them like deal with it and be patient and try, and sometimes just like, just be awkward, which is so, so, so true when you're interacting with someone else's culture, especially in that case where one is this very like, almost mechanistic at this point, kind of modernized culture, imperial thing.
Mhm.
Oh, we're so sophisticated. We have all these, we have all this cuisine. We have all these like, sophisticated modern experiences. And then these other people who are like, yeah, we're like keeping specific ways that we've always kept. And we have these other things that are extremely distinct, right? And personal.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I keep watching out for the kind of otherization or exoticization factor when it comes to like the Ainu in particular. And it seems mostly good. It seems mostly palatable. But I kind of wonder if there's like Japanese tropes about the Ainu that I'm missing because I don't know what they typify about them, right?
Yeah, that is the hardest part.
Yeah. So that's my impression so far, is that it's really interesting. It's really fun. It's actually, for such a dark show, it's actually really chill. So
it's really goofy.
Yeah, it's like even when they're blowing each other's heads off, like it's like, this is a pretty chill watch,
Yeah, one of the chapter that I just read, one of the characters, it's showing like his childhood. He gets kidnapped, and while his dad is coming to rescue him, he's like striking the pose that what's his name playing Freddie Mercury did for that Queen movie,
Oh yeah.
Like he drew that literal that exact pose on purpose while he was like holding some kind of it wasn't a microphone, it was like a horn from a bike or something like that. But
right.
And then like the one right before that, they're like chasing after the kidnappers, and the guy's motorcycle like blows up and all his clothes get ripped off, so he's just like running shirtless down the road and stuff like that. It's so funny.
Yeah.
And I really like the food part of it too. But yeah, Una, what did you think? What was your impression?
Yeah, so it was actually really hard for me to get into it at all.
Okay.
Una's part of that elite imperial culture that's too sophisticated to enjoy this kind of drivel, right?
Well, yeah, well, the thing is, like, by and large, what it is, it's a seinen manga about a treasure hunt.
Yep.
Right.
And from what I've heard later on, it does get very, wow, they just keep running into the people they need.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right.
So it's a bit kind of King Arthur shit. Like, it's like, oh, and then we went to the Grail hunt, and then, they just happened to find this one weird, obscure character that we absolutely needed to find, or else nothing else would line up. Sort of plot driven is what you're saying?
Yeah, like a lot of that's definitely forgivable because, it's just a manga, and obviously, like, they're not going to show every, like, day they spend not finding anything. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, so, like, my immediate impression of it was very, it's just a treasure hunt show that basically treats minority cultures as, like, a gimmick to sell it. And, like, I was like, maybe I'm just being a bit mean about that. But at the same time, like, reading the manga, it's very, they tell the story, but then they spend, like, 5 chapters just dropping, like, vocabulary about Ainu culture. And, like...
You're saying you don't want Ainu representation in media? Is that your position? For the record?
I'm saying that the representation of it isn't really so much representation as, like, show and tell.
Sure. Absolutely. Actually, that was something, I'm glad you brought that up. If I could just say real quick that I also noticed, and I was thinking, like, I was trying to be fair to, like, well, it is interesting stuff, right? But I've noticed that manga and anime sometimes do that kind of show and tell thing when it comes to some random other culture or like an encounter with the other. Is they're like, hey, let me just tell you like the Wikipedia entry on this essentially. And you're like, okay, that's 3 pages of stuff. Cool. Like, go on. Sorry.
It's just very how it came off to me. And, it's nice that at the end of every volume, the author lists citations of books he's read and gives credit to like this language consultant for the Ainu language.
Mhm.
So like,
Mhm.
obviously he put a lot of research into this. To a certain extent, you could trust that the majority of it isn't super fictionalized.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's just sort of reaching for reasons to make it relevant,
Yeah.
just to say it. And there's also a lot of stuff that's like lost in translation with that. Like you were saying, the ex-soldiers and whatnot are all very hard to distinguish.
Mm.
And a lot of their characterization is the author really likes drawing hot guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah.
Actually, most of the reason I was able to continue reading at all was I was reading interviews with the author, and it's very much everyone just thinks his characters are hot.
Yeah. I'm 100% here for that. Yeah.
You didn't even get to a lot of the homoerotic parts.
The author has said that he only draws nudity when absolutely necessary, so that's
Yeah, right.
Well, you know what they say about necessity.
a bit of a stretch, but some of their other characterization is a bit like things you won't really tell in like an English version, because like the 7th Division or whatever is I guess the author describes it as people from all over Japan, so there's a lot of like dialectical distinctions, but because military and they're all working together, they all had to learn quote unquote standard Japanese.
Right.
So it doesn't come out very often, but you'll see like throughout, like when they're talking to their families and whatnot, which supposedly comes up, they speak in more of a local dialect. But like from what I've read, the reason why they came from all over Japan is that the 7th Division was mostly made up of former Totenhei, which is kind of a... I don't want to say that, like, there isn't a lot of pointing out the fact that this was a huge colonial expedition, but they were pioneers colonizing Hokkaido.
Can you explain that? I've never heard that term.
Totenhei, they a lot of places will literally just translate it as pioneer. Essentially, they were the Development Commission or whatever for Hokkaido, sometimes just called the Colonization Commission. They gave land to settlers,
right?
The typical thing. A lot of them were like indentured servants, essentially. But
Tondenhei, I just looked it up. This is something I want to come back to when we talk more about like the history of the Ainu. But keep going. I just wanted to make a note that this has got some historical roots.
Yeah, that was pretty much the whole point, is that a lot of the people who came to Hokkaido to get land and colonize it ended up being members of the 7th Division. So like the great defenders of the North and whatnot were mostly pioneers, and it doesn't really, as far as I've read, it doesn't really come up ever, but it's definitely like an overarching context to why they're all here.
Yeah.
And like Seiichi Sugimoto, if you will, he is just in Hokkaido because he thought there'd be gold.
That is true. Yep. That's like the very first thing that happens.
Yeah, so it's obvious that he'd butt heads with the 7th Division, who've been at this for a while, but it's that sort of like typical setup of the local military is already in on the local plot, and our main character is the outsider.
Right.
It's basically Dances with Wolves in Japan.
Yeah. And like the characterization of Sugimoto also is kind of weird to me. Pretty early on, it's shown, I believe the chapter's like literally called like Persecution or whatever. Sugimoto's past of most of his family died of tuberculosis.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And so he was persecuted in his hometown. He burned down his house because, there's no place for anyone here anymore, so I'm going to leave. And, that's why he cares so much about his war buddy's wife.
That's the only reason.
Because they weren't just war buddies; they were from the same hometown, and he left her to his friend. So she was actually his love, etc., etc. Right? But it kind of frames that whole story as like, oh no, Sugimoto's cool with like Ainu culture and whatnot because he gets being persecuted.
Interesting.
It's a very, I don't think it's 100% like they're just saying like, oh, this is the only reason why he's vibing with them. It was just sort of putting that there immediately as sort of like, yeah, this is why he's cool. Sort of, I guess, liberal in a sense can only sympathize with the plight of the Ainu people because he also has been hated by the Japanese.
Right. The oppression Olympics of the tuberculosis soldier.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Was that in the show or just in the backstory that you read up on?
That's in the manga. I don't think it's in the show.
Okay. I was like, I didn't pick up on that at all. That's amazing. Your exegetical skills are unparalleled.
Yeah, I was skipping around, so I didn't notice that in the show. So I can't say for sure that it's not in there. And then I started reading the manga like on chapter 160 something. So
yeah, as far as I recall, it wasn't in the anime. I only saw the first season, but it would have been within the first season.
Oh, okay.
If it were adapted one for one.
Gotcha.
So, like, I guess my general impression of it was very, this manga is here to tell a generic story and also trivia about the Ainu, which isn't bad per se. I don't dislike it for that. I just don't view it as like a thing that I would regularly go out and be like, I want to learn about the Ainu. Let's read this treasure hunting manga. But, I guess to be fair, there are not a lot of English sources on most of this anyway.
That's true.
Yeah, that's true. And I've read like a fair amount of the English sources that are available on Ainu, and much, if not most, of the information that's available in there about like their culture and practices and stuff is in the anime. Like, I thought I'd found something interesting about the gold mining in Hokkaido. From one of the books that I was reading, and then when I was watching the anime, I realized that Huki, the grandma, she like just completely says the exact thing that I'd found, which is like, oh yeah, the gold mining was devastating to the the river ecology and caused like pressures on fishing resources that like led to conflict with in between the Ainu villages. And she just straight up says it, and I was like, "Oh, okay. I guess I'm not getting as much out of this as I thought."
Yeah, a lot of characters do seem to just sort of exposition dump history, and I don't know. It sort of gives off this impression that like this isn't a story that is someone who's been interacting with Ainu people and discussing their culture and history and went, "I want to write a story that takes place in this culture," and wrote about a story that would. It's very Sirpa's sort of an outsider. She's like not necessarily socially an outsider, but she constantly puts forward this whole the younger generation doesn't follow all the traditions, and she didn't have any brothers, so she went hunting with her father, and that's weird. And she just goes off.
She's not like the other girls, right?
Yeah, she's not like the other girls. So her story isn't a story, about someone living in an Ainu village, living their life and going on whatnot. It is someone who was already, on the edge of it, and she, Sugimoto basically says outright, like, you might be in it for revenge. I just need you to like help me. So it's it's Sugimoto's story,
right?
Yeah,
right.
Which is pretty disappointing, but not unexpected.
I do think the focus, like after where you're at, like closer to like chapter 120 or so, I think the focus like really shifts more to her, because there are definitely like you'll go several chapters without even really seeing Sugimoto at the part that I'm at.
That's something to look forward to when I actually get around to finishing this.
Yeah, she's definitely like I'm trying not to reveal too much. I'm trying to figure out how to say it without revealing too much, but like the conflict starts to center more on like what she is going to do for the future of the Ainu than just the treasure hunt part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
which is like more animating the antagonists than the protagonists at that point. But yeah, those are all good criticisms. I'm too stupid to like notice when something is just an exposition dump. I'm just like, oh, this story is interesting, cool. So none of that is anything that I noticed at all. So thank you for all that.
I think it's funny when they do exposition dumps because they don't tell you a lot at the same time.
Right. Fair.
Like, fun fact, Sirpa's cloak or blanket that she wears is the pelt of Retar's parents.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, she just wears that all the time. It's great.
So you said you read a bunch of interviews. Did the author like talk about what motivated him to start writing the manga?
Yeah, I'd have to like recall it fully, but I believe it was basically something along the lines of the treasure hunting concept.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a bunch of links to interviews, but
Was it like he started thinking of that and then like kind of started reading about the Ainu and thought it would be cool to put it in? Is it basically that kind of thing, or?
yeah, I'd have to find it again. I
Okay.
honestly don't remember.
I feel like I read one interview, but yeah, it was too long ago for me to remember too.
Yeah.
I saw a comment on these notes that was from November of last year, so it's been I've been working on the notes for a while.
Yeah, a lot of the, I guess, to just broadly put it into context, the author was, like most mangaka, originally he was just an assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And his only other published manga before this, and obviously the only reason anyone cares about it now is because of this, was a high school hockey sports manga. The one guy that I forget characters' names. The one Mitagi character, the one he hangs out with, the big
Tanigaki.
Yeah, the big buff. I think it was like Nihei Tetsuzo or whatever.
Yeah.
The older one?
Yeah, the one he hangs out with.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, he is literally just copy and pasted a previous character from the high school hockey team.
And he was one of the players?
Yeah, so just imagine that guy, but just playing high school hockey.
With the gray hair and everything.
Yeah. I put some work into figuring out why that character was, because there's that 1982 movie Mitagi, or The Old Bear Hunter, that has a very similar premise to his character, but evidently that isn't why. There was another book, I believe, about a Mitagi hunter, about hunting wolves. So the fact that he's hunting a wolf in the story sort of but the protagonist of that book is also named Nihei, I believe. So the author was just like, you know who else is named that? Previous character from a hockey manga. So, it's very much a manga, is my point.
Gotcha.
And trying to read it as like sort of like a look into Ainu culture was very difficult.
Right. Speaking of that movie, the Montagi movie, I've ordered the DVD of that from this like specialty DVD website, and Una, I hope, is joining me for a future episode where we're gonna watch that and talk about it.
Yeah, that sounds very great. I love obscure 80s movies about things in Japan.
Okay. Is there anything else we wanted to talk about with the anime and manga and criticisms, or what's the opposite of criticism? I don't even know.
Praise?
Praise?
Yeah.
Promotion?
Praise, yeah.
Uh,
Anything else on the manga or anime before I move on to the other shit that I wrote down here?
Adulation?
Positive opinions.
Scintillating adoration.
I never have them, so I don't know.
The guys in it are very hot, I've heard.
Yeah, wait till you get to the episode where they eat, is it otter meat, I think? Something like that? It's something like that. And they basically have like a big gay orgy
Oh, hell yeah.
because of this meat that makes them really horny.
Oh, fuck
Yeah.
yeah.
That strikes me as odd given the part that was cut out because it was too horny.
Oh yeah, I did want to say the part about him only drawing nudity if it's necessary. One of the chapters that I just read, they were like some of the 7th Division soldiers were at this hot spring, and one guy was just sitting with his cock and balls out and like letting this waterfall pour on it, and he kept saying his balls were switching places.
It's hard to take the author seriously on that one. It might have been a joke. Yeah, a lot of the interviews are very horny. So,
okay. Well, I guess I'll move on. One of the things that the show did for me was sent me on like this rabbit hole of reading about Ainu and other ethnic minorities of Japan, and also like kind of put some stuff together for me. I had picked up like part of a realization from Against the Grain, which is the other James Scott book. We're currently reading Seeing Like a State on the podcast. This is just a little break from it because I've been reading it nonstop for months now. But yeah, reading about the Ainu and like the Tatars, which come up later in the manga and the anime, and just thinking about other minority groups like the Sami in, is it Norway, I think,
Finland,
or I don't know, one of those fucking stupid countries, and the Picts,
yeah,
and like, you know, indigenous Americans and so on. Kind of made me realize that all states are built on, if not genocide, then definitely ethnocide, and I think we've already started talking about that a little bit with the Totenhei. I think, Kris, you said you had something you wanted to add about them, right?
Yeah. Is this a good time to talk about like the sort of the deeper history behind like the Ainu and other indigenous groups in Japan?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm trying to get at. I mean, I guess I can. This isn't too much longer, so I'll just get through this part real quick.
Okay.
So the thing that made me realize was like a nation state requires the creation of a national identity to which all of its citizens have to adhere. It attempts to create a uniform culture and identity out of culturally distinct people with different ways of living, cultures, languages, belief systems, values, and so on. And, you know, that may have been able to work non-violently if like living in a nation state was actually beneficial to everyone involved. Maybe taking like several generations for it to happen, but in practice, nation states were created through like banning cultural practices and nomadic ways of life, the enforcement of national languages, forced religious conversion, name registration, land enclosure, and the destruction of the wilds, all of which we just happen to be covering in Seeing Like a State. But and also like specifically hunting other predators to extinction, which most of the characters thought had already happened to the wolves in Golden Kamuy. they were surprised to see an Ezo wolf because they're extinct now. But yeah, that's just the thing I started thinking about, and part of my motivation for like starting to read Seeing Like a State, actually. But so yeah, what did you want to continue with, Kris?
Yeah, so I have read not the whole book, but I have this trilogy of books written by George Sansom that are just a history of Japan in these various eras, right? And so I read, I think, probably the first couple hundred pages of the one from like, from prehistory until like the 1300s. So I got up until about the 900s when they start to adopt a lot of the Chinese administrative techniques and stuff like that really heavily, and start to get into Buddhism and stuff, stuff like that. But what's really interesting with regards to the Ainu and other possibly distinct ethnic groups in Japan that are indigenous to those islands is that the Yamato people, which are like the the people that are generally identified as quote unquote Japanese, they, from what we can tell, at least according to the history that I've been reading, they first settled Kyushu, which is that, southwestern island off of Korea. And of course, there's a lot of low murmuring about how Korean these people might have actually been. And some people find that very intriguing and what culture was this really, and where did they actually kind of come from? And there was also a lot of apparent like Chinese migration early on. And so there was like some early, at the very least, resonances with the stuff on the Korean Peninsula. But the culture of these people was definitely distinct from who they would call the Emishi and the Ainu and so forth, who are these quote unquote like hairy barbarians and whatever, who lived to the east and to the north. What happened eventually, and this is way back in the early hundreds of the current era, if you will. There are only a handful of extremely easily exploited alluvial plains in the Japanese islands, where you can like do a shit ton of farming all in one place. And as we know about the formation of states and state-like societies, when you can hoe a row, you start to have kings and stuff. So so they're like okay, we got this smallish but decently sized plain where we're currently settled. And then there was some kind of political split, or like a bunch of how it is with people in state societies. They always talk about like crowding and overpopulation, and they start to get cranky toward each other because of like political ambitions and stuff. So some stuff happened, and it's a little hazy, but basically one of the leaders took a bunch of settlers over to Honshu, and they just kind of walked along, and they kind of expanded eastward, northward until they got to what we call the Kanto Plain, which then they were like, this is the shit. This is ours now. And they like killed a bunch of the fucking native people, of course, to keep it. And there was like war all along the fringes of their new settlement. And meanwhile, of course, they were building up, right? They were accruing more and more kind of state features, as well as architecture and stuff, right? And infrastructure. So then at this point, they'd established the area north and east of the Kanto Plain as kind of their frontier. And there were lots of people, Yamato ethnic people settling all over southern Honshu at this point, right? And this is I think the 500s, 600s. So then they started to do a few different things, right? The state was starting to become sort of a little more sophisticated. It was starting to make more contact with the mainland and talk to the Korean rulers and the Chinese rulers and so forth, and start to adopt Chinese modes of governance and things like that. And at the same time, they start to want to more consciously and systematically take over, of course, more land, more stuff, and get a stronger grip on their sort of, who they see as their proper subject population, right? Well, to the kind of the north and the east, where they've established a frontier, what was really interesting is, I think this is now in the 700s roughly, a bunch of the Yamato people who had settled in that frontier zone, again, as they think of it, had basically become more or less, friendly neighbors to like the Ainu, Emishi, whoever was living there. And so they were, even if they didn't necessarily adopt each other's cultures in those areas, they were familiar with it. And there do appear to be a bunch of, Ainu and other loan words into Japanese. We suspect that Kamuy in Ainu may have developed into the Japanese word kami, right? It seems pretty obvious. And so a bunch of these, Yamato people who were living amongst and nearby the Ainu and or Emishi, because again, it's not necessarily clear whether they were distinct ethnic groups or not from each other. They were much more willing to hang out with them and, do things like not pay taxes and not be part of an organized army than the people in the sort of the core, right, on the Kanto plain, and especially close to the cities and stuff. And so the central government did a very state thing to do, and they decided that they were going to basically give a bunch of that, just by fiat, just give away a bunch of that land in that area to people from the core who wanted to go out and settle it actively, right? And be like their kind of stooges, right? So it became this deliberate kind of shoring up of power along that edge, and then they started to push upward and outward, and this, of course, turned into the conflicts from which the title shogun, right? I forget the long form, but
Sei Taishogun.
Sei Taishogun. That's right. I was like, it's not Taisei, it's Sei. Yeah. But that of course is the subduer of the Eastern barbarians, and it's from this exact process that came. And this was around the same time that the Fujiwara clan was emerging as kind of like the power behind the imperial throne, and retained that power for another few hundred years. So it was this whole complex process of like the creation of what we recognize as the kind of classical Japanese, the Heian state, whatever, was developed in part through these processes in which the Yamato people were being kind of molded into state subjects, right? And that the frontiers were being brought under control through these settlement paradigms and settlement programs. I mean, directly in opposition to that kind of dissent and that friendliness with the barbarians and so forth. And then as this developed, then of course, over the centuries, that frontier, quote unquote, got pushed further and further and further north and east and north until, it was up to Sendai, and then it was up to Hokkaido. So that's kind of the rundown there. But it was really interesting how there was that confluence of those different processes, right? That the state became itself in a way, partly through its like you kind of have mentioned, the ethnocide, the genocidal process, right?
So I'll add a couple things. One thing is the Emishi. This is according to Brett Walker, who wrote one of the books that I've been reading. There's like speculation that the Emishi may have just been a term for barbarians, and it might have been like multiple different cultures.
Right.
And it like only later was perceived as a distinct culture outside the realm of the Japanese state.
Yeah.
I also put certainly the most famous Emishi is Ashitaka from Princess Mononoke.
Right.
But also, let's see. He said they seem to have mostly tributary relationship to the Japanese state. They brought horses to them. There's also a group called the Watarishima Emishi that may have actually been the Ainu or like the proto-Ainu. And they brought animal skins as tribute rather than horses. And the name translates to Emishi who crossed from the island, as in Ezo, which is, Hokkaido, Sakhalin, and whatever the fuck the other one is.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Kuril. And there's speculation that the Hiraizumi Fujiwara, which is that military clan that you were talking about, may have had Emishi people in important positions because they and their children's bodies were mummified, which is how Sakhalin Ainu chiefs and the Tungus, I don't know if that's pronounced correctly, but indigenous Siberians and other Eurasian people dealt with their dead. One of the speculations of the origin of the Ainu is that they came from the interaction of the barbarians of the Japanese islands and the continental people from Russia. So, I remembered something I was going to say earlier. It's weird to me that the earliest Japanese supposedly came from Korea, because if you look at a map, the gap between the Korean peninsula and the closest part of Japan is way bigger than the gap between Sakhalin and the northernmost tip of Hokkaido. So it seems like it would be harder for someone to go from Korea to Japan than to go from southeast Russia to Japan.
Yeah.
The Watarishima Emishi, which I already mentioned, they show similarities to the Satsumon culture, which is an extinct ethnic group from northern Honshu and southern Hokkaido. They were fishing people because they had harpoons. They also hunted because they had a lot of arrowheads, and they did some sort of agriculture, small scale grain agriculture. And they share similarities with Ainu farming because they have elevated grain storehouses to keep mice out, which is something that the Ainu villages commonly used, but not the Yamato Japanese. Oh, and on the subject of the term for Japanese or whatever, there was another book that I read called Beyond Ainu Studies, and they discuss the question of are the Ainu part of Japanese history or not, and the conflict is on one hand to give the Ainu agency as historical subjects, but on the other to give them agency in the modern Japanese nation state. And by making Ainu completely distinct from the Japanese, then Japaneseness in the modern sense becomes culturally and ethnically monolithic. And many histories basically make the Ainu non-distinct from the Japanese because it's essentially all about how they were oppressed by the Matsumai clan. And there was a historian named Sasaki Toshikazu, goddamn. And he said even the best intentioned attempts to incorporate the Ainu into narratives of Japanese history will relegate them to the fringes, because from the standpoint of the center of the Japanese state, they were. But by focusing on the Ainu realm, which is often called Ainu Mosir, the relationship can be inverted. So the Japanese would be on the fringes. And so because of that, to talk about the Japanese, he actually uses a semi-pejorative word that the Ainu created for the Japanese, which is shamo, which is they compared it to haole for Hawaiian people to talk about white foreigners. So it's that level of derogatory, not a racial slur, but I fucking shamo, fucking haole kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all I got from that particular bit. But so I have a lot on the Ainu, so I do want to talk about some of the other groups. I think Una got a decent amount of info on the Matagi. Do you want to talk about the Matagi a bit, Una?
Decent amount is a bit of a stretch.
An indecent amount.
There just like literally are no like accessible English sources on them, and I'd like to say I did good research, but I'd open a lot of pages and just be like, oh shit, this is all in Japanese. But I guess the
You didn't learn Japanese for my podcast? What the hell?
I didn't learn Japanese for my article on Hokkaido in 2018. I'm not doing it now. Which actually did touch on a lot of the things. That's how I know about the Dodenhei. But the thing with the Mategi is that it is kind of questionable, like, if you can really refer to them as like an ethnicity. It's
Right. Yep. That was one of the questions I had and never answered.
Yeah, that's it just sort of comes down to the concept of ethnicity and how a lot of it is attempts of like tracking down evolutionary and genetic lines. And personally, I don't really support doing that to begin with.
Yeah.
So all that really matters is that the Mategi is a culture,
Yeah.
primarily of hunting, and they have something of a pretty large vocabulary, more or less unique to them.
Okay.
And it's, as expected, a lot of it is terms taken from Ainu language.
Okay.
And, that's really all there is to that, is that they were essentially like northeastern Japan, Honshu, hunters that took a lot of ideas from Ainu hunting strategies and language and whatnot. And if anything, it really just more, I guess, as far as anything available in English goes, it points to a lot of like interesting discussion of Japanese dialects. Because standard Japanese, as it were, is kind of a very, it's like received pronunciation.
Okay.
It's a dialect.
Very contrived and not related to how people actually talk.
Yeah, it's very much the this is how upstanding citizens from Tokyo talk.
Got you.
And as this is a podcast about anime, I will take this opportunity to mention that anime sucks about this.
In what way?
Particularly pretty well known dialect, to the point where it is usually the other, the Kansai dialect, is usually used in anime to denote otherness.
Mhm.
Like, this is a country bumpkin. They speak different. And, it just sort of comes up in what are usually like lighthearted, like workplace or high school anime, where there's just the one character who's trying their best to speak standard Japanese, but every once in a while slips into their hometown dialect.
Right.
There's things like that. So kind of shifting through that sort of concept when it comes to the Mategi is kind of... I'd like to do a more extensive research, but it definitely requires knowing Japanese.
Right. Yeah, it's funny about Kansai, because Kansai developed in the Kinki region, which is like fucking Osaka and shit. It's basically just like central and also archaic seat of Japanese civilization dialect, and it's like urban as fuck. So it's like that's just like if you decided to typify like LA dialect as distinct from DC dialect to denote like bumpkin talk, right? You're like, well, but it's a huge metropolis, and the capital used to be there. So I don't know. I mean, it's the Inaka, the countryside, of course, is all around those cities, but it's still funny to me.
Dialects.
So there is one English language book on the Mategi that I looked for on LibGen. It's not there, and I'm thinking of getting it and seeing like how hard it would be to digitize it so I can throw it up there. And I don't know if Una, did you see the National Geographic article about the Mategi?
I saw a few articles. I don't really remember which ones, but I believe I saw a Nat Geo one. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. The people who wrote that one wrote this book, So I think it's just like an extended version of the article. Which one thing I noticed about that article, like the person that wrote it was supposedly like the first or the second photographer to ever be allowed to observe the Matagi practices. The first one was a Japanese person, and this guy was just like an American or something. And I don't think his photos are good. Like one of them is like, oh, look at this ritual they're doing where they're doing like a spiritual offering with like a bottle of sake and a bear heart. And you don't see the bear heart at all. And it just looks like a bunch of guys sitting like around a table and looking at a guy who's like standing and facing the wall.
Yeah, the Matagi have a lot of rituals, and nobody will ever talk about any of them, and it's very hard to find anything that's like conclusive about it.
Right.
Like, as I previously mentioned, there was a bit that I honestly don't even remember if it was in the manga or not, but it definitely wasn't in the anime. It's what's his face?
Tanigaki.
Yeah, with Nihei, they do a ritual it's essentially an initiation ritual.
Uh-huh.
It involves something about stoking a fire with your dick out, and like, like, there's no sources on that in English whatsoever, and I guess as to be expected, most of the mentions of their culture at all are very similar to like Golden Kamuy about Ainu culture, where it was a book about something and they needed to have like a little section to explain it. Which is wonderful and makes me very happy. But as far as I can tell from those, for the most part, like, obviously it's very borrowed from Ainu culture, especially with the spirituality and the idea of like mountain gods and whatnot.
Yeah, they seem to worship bears to some degree, like Ainu.
Yeah, and I know there's like an anecdote. It might have been the previous guy who was observing Matagi culture, or it might have been the latter one. But one of them was saying something about essentially the gods of the mountains have low self-confidence.
Aw.
Right, and they perceive themselves to be ugly, so the Matagi, make offerings of things that are, ugly, certain plants and vegetation in general. And essentially the anecdote was about the Matagi hunter he was paired with at the time just took his dick out as like, this is what we have at the time.
Because his dick is ugly? Is that what it's supposed to be?
Yeah, well, like, I guess it's a general concept of dicks are typically considered ugly in most cultures. I don't get it, but
it's a shame, really.
Yeah, but
that's a weird response too. Like, hey, buddy, sorry you feel bad about being ugly. I got you this ugly cup to, make you not feel so bad about being ugly yourself.
Yeah, but, like, a lot of spirituality is very like that. Like, the gods feel this way, so, we have to do our best to please them as a reaction to that.
Well, that's fine. I just think it's like, if someone feels bad about being ugly, I don't think my response would be like, let me get you some ugly things.
Yeah.
But I guess if you're offering things like, what qualities could you pick to make them feel better about that? I don't know.
No, I imagine if you sat there in a mountain for several millennia and just sort of like hated how you looked, just people every once in a while coming up to remind you, like, no, there's some ugly shit in this world and you're not it. I could see that being calming in a way.
Yeah, when you put it that way, I think I agree. One thing I did find about the Matagi is they date back to the 17th century, which I think does support borrowed a lot of their things from the Ainu. whatever you call it. Man, my brain is fucked right now.
Tradition, culture.
Speculation. That's what I was looking for. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe we'll get more about the Matagi by the time we get to that Old Bear Hunter movie. I'll try and order the book. The only reason I hesitated is this like 35 or 40 euros or something like that, which is kind of a lot.
Obscure books are like that.
Yeah.
Try finding libraries that decided they don't want it.
I don't think it's going to be in the library. I can check, but I think it's one of those. It seems like they have a whole company that they created for like 2 books, and that's the main one that they're trying to sell. So
Una's a hot tip about obscure academic literature is that universities typically stock their libraries by giving lists of recommended books and put no effort beyond that. And a lot of those books no one actually reads, so they sell them off later.
I will look then. The closest university to me is George Mason, which is I don't know if they're going to have that.
Yeah. I just got some book from the 70s that's usually going for like $80 for like $12. So
Nice.
yeah.
Okay, let's see. I will talk about the Uilta a little bit, even though that stuff doesn't come until like chapter 159 or something. But they are one of these like more continental minority groups. They are in the western part of Sakhalin, and they practice sky burial, which to me is like the coolest way to bury your dead. If you don't know what that is, it's like you basically put their body kind of elevated somewhere, and scavengers just like eat your corpse. It's done in what's it called? What's that? Tibet, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And by the time of the show, their culture was sort of disappearing because a lot of them were being converted to Russian Orthodox Christianity. But they're nomads. They live in tents during the summer, and they have a winter house. That was like something I found really interesting, was like all of these groups have summer and winter homes, and they're basically like built differently out of different materials in different locations. And the summer home tends to be like more mobile, like more like a tent or something that can be like moved. And the winter home is just like a box with a fire in it. Yeah, so they have summer winter homes. Kira Ranke says they measure their wealth by the number of reindeer they have. So they're like pastoralists, basically. They graze reindeer, but they don't ever eat the reindeer. They seem to just milk them and make like cheese and butter out of the milk. And they hunt wild reindeer for their meat because supposedly the domesticated reindeer meat tastes worse. Which I guess I could see for various reasons. But I don't know a ton about that stuff, so.
Well, I imagine the depression that results from imprisonment would make your flesh taste pretty shitty. So,
well, they do seem to let them like roam pretty freely, because one of the things that happens is Ogata shoots a reindeer, and then they walk up to it and they're like, "This reindeer has a collar on. That's weird."
Oop.
And then they hear a guy calling for his reindeer to come home. So,
Oof.
And another bit around this part that I liked was Ogata gave an Uilta woman a set of needles with like a needle case, and he explained that they're like extremely important, and that there's a well-known saying that the woman who doesn't cry when she loses a baby still cries when she loses a needle. Yeah, and the only other thing I have is like story details, so I won't talk about that. But there's one more group that I have down here, which is the Nifk. I think that's how you pronounce it. And I didn't really get like any information on them. I think that's the hardest one to find, and we don't see them until like chapter 179 or something like that. So if I do another episode on this, I'll come back to them. Unless Una, you didn't happen to look up anything about them, did you?
You see, the thing about a lot of these cultures is that most of the literature is in Polish.
Makes sense because it's so close to Poland.
Right.
Yeah. Well, actually, it is kind of relevant to culture in Hokkaido. That there's like a whole like cultural exchange with Poland there now. Because some guy who tried assassinating the Tsar got pushed out into forced labor on Sakhalin, and he just sort of like did sociology instead.
That's what I'm going to do if I ever get sent to a labor prison island or whatever.
He wrote quite a few books. I think there's like 4 volumes of his collected works on different cultures and languages in that area. I'll try saying his name, but it's Polish. It's like Bronisław Piłsudski.
Okay.
The L crossed thing in Polish is impossible to pronounce now.
Oh yeah, I don't know how to do that. Someone shared me this like part of a Polish movie where this Polish guy, is like trying to hide from the Nazis, and he does it by having a really impossible to spell name, which is like Grzegorz Bręczyszkiewicz.
Yeah.
It's a funny clip, but anyway.
It's very Eastern European, but spelled wrong. But the point is, there's a statue of him in Hokkaido. It's great.
Okay.
But only a couple of the volumes I've been able to find any sort of English translation on, but they do have a long list of references of other works to read about it. So, if you're ever looking to learn more about things, he's got you, just in Polish.
Don't know if I'm dedicated enough to learn Polish for the podcast.
Oh, I see.
I'm fine with you learning Japanese, but if I have to learn Polish, that's a bridge too far.
I guess generally, Volume 4 is materials for study of Tungusic languages and folklore, and it's got a whole bunch of stuff about, I guess, Tungusic languages. That's a very questionable term because it comes from like some word for pig, but people are the way they are, and so. But yeah, there's definitely things about stuff over there. There's rare and difficult for a podcast.
Yeah. Maybe I'll start a PhD on this and just start reading about that stuff. All right, so I have a bunch more stuff on the Ainu if we want to talk about that. We talked about the Fujiwara clan, but not the Matsumai clan, which I think they sort of shared territory. You said the Fujiwara clan was like they were basically the most powerful during the Heian period, right, Kris?
Yeah, they were kind of like I don't know, like the Clintons or something.
Okay.
Except they were, like they were just like they had their fucking shit and everything. Yeah, one of their ways that they kept power and maintained power is they kept marrying their daughters to emperors. So, that's a way to do that. And so they basically just...
Exactly like the Clintons.
Yeah, exactly. Just marry Chelsea to Donald Trump, and you're done. But yeah, they just kind of like clawed and crawled their way to the top in like, I think the 600s and 700s. And then just kind of like politicked their way into the imperial bedroom in a sense. And then were there for a long time.
Okay. So the Matsumai clan is like they held the northernmost part of Honshu, and they had like rights granted to basically like exclusive trade with Hokkaido and the Ainu. This is, I wrote down they resided in Wajinchi, but I feel like that's just the name for Honshu. but I also say it's a province on the southern peninsula of Hokkaido. So I don't know. But anyway, most of their wealth and power was derived from Ezo and the Ainu in like a kind of vassal relationship. Kris and I did that episode on the Kokudaka system, and the daimyo were those who had over, I think it was 50,000 koku of land. And the Matsumai clan were the one exception to that. They were granted like a special status of daimyo because they were on the frontier. And so they basically like got all these special exceptions and permissions to deal with the people of Ezo. Much of the history of the Ainu before the modern period was all focused on the Matsumai clan. They had a border on between Wajinchi and Ezochi, and it was basically a one-way border. Like the Japanese people could go to Hokkaido whenever they wanted, but the Ainu were mostly kept out, except for like I think there was like a trading post that they could go to in that area. And a lot of the Shamo depend on the ability to cross the border to apply their trades. So it was very much a one-way border. I have a little bit on the emergence of the Ainu. So I think this was from Brett Walker's book. Starting from 1223, a port city called Tosa Minato on the Tsugaru Peninsula established trade between Honshu and Ezogashima, which I think is just another word for Ezochi. That's the thing about this book. He introduces all these names and places and terms and never explains any of them. So
love it.
May as well just fucking learn Japanese.
Yeah, they're usually just suffixes. I don't know why people refuse to hyphenate these things.
Yeah.
So the Emishi sent salmon and animal skins on tax-exempt ships and received Japanese goods in return. So they were like taxing the other like trade ships that weren't like the official ones. And so like the trade and increased administration of the border between Honshu and Ezo led to the emergence of the Ainu culture. So like it's basically speculated that like the Ainu kind of emerged as like their culture came from the interrelation between the barbarians and the state, so to speak.
Right.
But of course it's like, you know, it's a very contested history, since there's perspectives on like, you know, wanting to make the Ainu like a distinct people and people who basically are like nationalists or whatever.
Right.
And I don't know enough to distinguish, you know, what's good information and what's not. So I'm just going to say everything that I've read so far. One of the most important events in Ainu history is Shakushain's War, which Brett Walker compared to King Philip's War in the pre-United States Americas. Do you know about that war? I read about it and then didn't write anything down. So
King Philip's War?
King Philip's War, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically, it's one of these frontier things, right? Like I was saying about like the various conflicts that the Japanese had with the indigenous, the indigenous people of Japan, of Honshu, and then eventually Hokkaido. But yeah, King Philip's War was essentially between the New England colonists and their various indigenous allies versus, King Philip was like the nickname of one of the indigenous chiefs. And so
okay.
I don't know how they gave him that nickname. You know, it's probably some colonial bullshit, but they basically,
I'm sure his name sounded just like Philip.
right. Surely. But yeah, basically there was some kind of conflict. You know how it goes in these fucking colonial histories. There's always some excuse for somebody to go after somebody. Usually the white people are wrong. or if they're right in the moment, it's for the wrong reasons,
Yeah.
But yeah, basically there was just a war between the colonists and the indigenous people. That's all I really remember. But I think it was pretty bloody.
Okay. Yeah. So that is similar to this. So basically, the Ainu like started experiencing like strain on their resources, and I don't think gold mining had started yet. But gold mining contributed to the resource strain later.
Mm-hmm.
And there was also like bans on farming. I think those were in effect at this point. So like the Matsumai clan at some point banned the Ainu from farming to the point where like some people tried to start a farm and they like came and ripped it all up.
Oh, Jesus.
But so like there were increased border disputes over the like fisheries and hunting grounds that were shared by different Ainu groups. Part of the problem was that they had like these loose borders that moved around between Khotan, and because like prey moves around and fish migrate and so on.
Right. So well, it's very much like what happened with the indigenous Americans and their particular ways of sustaining themselves, and where like they had just a different paradigm of using or being on the land, and obviously anyone who depends on hunting, like you said, is you're gonna have to follow your prey around, and the prey moves from season to season, so you move from season to season and all this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and so the trade that the Matsumai clan set up kind of caused people to start over hunting and overfishing, because they weren't just doing that for subsistence anymore. They were doing it for trade as well. So basically what happened was in an Ainu clan that was seen as like more loyal to the Matsumai, and this clan that was seen as kind of powerful within the Ainu, which was led by Shakushain. They started fighting each other, and it quickly escalated to the Ainu and the Japanese fighting one another. So there's like various interpretations of the war, which one of which is ethnic hatred, but it's a lot more complicated than that, since just in that barely coherent summary that I just gave, there was an Ainu clan that was like seen as loyal to the Matsumai, and so and on top of that, there were like Japanese fisheries that Ainu worked at, and so it's much more complicated than a ethnic conflict, but basically the result was a bunch of Ainu Khotan got destroyed. Like some Japanese died, but the losses on the Ainu side were greater than the losses on the Japanese side. And in response to that, I think they created like new prohibitions on the Ainu. I honestly thought I wrote a better summary than that, but that's what I got.
Yeah.
That was like the last major war. There was one before that was called Kosha Main's War. These guys all have the same kind of name. And I don't have much on that, but it was like it ended up with victory for the Ainu. The Japanese lost a bunch of forts, which is kind of cool.
Sucks to suck.
There was a lesser conflict that happened later called the Kunashiri Menashi Uprising. And that happened in 1789. And this was one of the things that a historian brought up in that article about like Ainu identity and stuff. Because this also had some like complex overlaps between, the sides of the conflict.
Yeah.
And the Matsumai basically operated like prior to this by exploiting existing political conflicts and systems of control. So like the Ainu villages obviously like had their own system of politics. It wasn't all, perfect, whatever. So the Matsumai clan ruled mainly by, befriending and controlling the right people.
Right.
Until this 1789 uprising, which started off as a labor dispute and erupted into ethnic violence. And the Matsumai sent a bunch of troops who eventually beheaded 37 Ainu. And so the shogunate, about 10 years later, which very long time to make this decision, were like, you guys are mistreating the Ainu. This is not working anymore. So after this, shogunate officials kind of took over the administration of the Ainu, and that kind of exposed them directly to the Japanese state. And it also limited the power of the local Ainu leaders, who basically like had to go through intermediaries between them and the Japanese state. And yeah, so that was a kind of pivotal moment for Ainu culture. I didn't write this down, but I think right around the beginning of the Meiji Restoration, I think it was in 1899, there was like a specific prohibition on a lot of Ainu cultural practices, and that was obviously an attempt to force them to assimilate into, Japanese identity.
Yeah, it was 1899. It was like a protection act.
Yeah. I hope I didn't say 1999.
No, you said 1899.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it was Meiji Protection Act, banned, I believe it was fishing, hunting, and woodcutting.
Okay.
Very cool. Very helpful for the locals.
Yeah, good stuff, for sure. The last thing I will mention, because we're starting to approach an ideal stopping point, Ainu political economy. So the Ainu had chiefdoms called Petiwar. They were formed of several villages along a watershed or river, and they were divided along the boundaries of subsistence practices. This is kind of what I was talking about with the borders. That they're obviously not borders in the modern sense, but like, claims on land. Well, I guess that is like borders in the modern sense. Anyway, so Petiwar's inhabitants linked their identity to I think it's pronounced Sine Itokba, which was a patrilineal household at the center of the Petiwar. And they had self-declared rights to exploit resources within that productive space. The author's words, not mine, which were articulated and sanctioned metaphysically rather than economically or politically. And they were authenticated by a sacred relationship that Ainu groups cultivated with local Kamuy. I don't like the way the guy writes, but what choice do I have but to read this? Yeah, I don't know if exploiting resources was like the way that they viewed it, but that's just how the author put it. So, but so they had like lots of different subsistence practices. They had deer hunts in the autumn that provided survival food for winter. Salmon and trout, which they fished in the summer and autumn, were also very important food sources. The fluid boundaries could sometimes cause conflict between chiefdoms who had overlapping claims on fish or game. And like I mentioned earlier, the conflict was escalated when Shamo trading posts went up. In the early 17th century, so actually this might have overlapped with Shakushain's war, the Matsumai began running salmon fisheries and placer mining operations. Placer mining is like mining rivers, which spread all over Hokkaido like very quickly. Like they started in, I think it was like 1719, and then by like 1740, they were basically all over Hokkaido. There was an interesting bit. A Portuguese missionary was in Hokkaido at this time, and he had a very specific description of how these mining operations worked. So he said, their way of extracting gold from these mines is as follows. When they have decided on the mountain range in which, according to experts, there ought to be gold, friends and acquaintances get together and, united in a body, purchase from the dono of Matsumai so many ells, and in brackets, 1 L is about 45 inches, of one of the rivers which flow through the said range for so many bars of gold, and they must pay these bars whether they find gold or not. And when a great number of such groups come to the river, they divert the flow of water along a different course and then dig into the sand which remains until they reach the living stone and rock beneath the riverbed. And the sand lodged in the rents and fissures of the rock is found gold as fine as beach gravel. So basically, like, they purchased rights for like a little tranche of the river, and they had to pay them in gold. So it was like a form of speculation of this era. And so in 1724, long after the gold mining had started, there were reports of widespread Ainu starvation due to poor salmon runs. There's one village where like 200 people starved to death, and then there were other reports from other areas that were almost as bad as that. And there was even an Ainu epic poem that suggested that gold mining was the cause of Shakushine's war.
Mm-hmm.
And a report from a Hirosaki spy also connects Shakushine's war to poor salmon runs, but because of Shamo merchants using huge nets to catch salmon for sale rather than because of gold mining specifically. And so in the 18th century, the Ainu imported a lot of rice from Wajinchi, and there is this is the prohibitions on grain farming that I was talking about. There was evidence of that. There is a report of an attempt by Ainu to grow rice being destroyed and punished by officials. And in 1888, a report showed that the Matsumai family imported 66.7 thousand koku of rice, and they used 10,000 koku of it to trade with the Ainu. Yeah. So I think since I'm going to come back to the show later, I'll save the other stuff that I've read for another time, especially because we're starting to run a little long. But did either of you have anything else you want to add?
You do have a note here about the exports of the shogunate, despite their image as an isolationist.
Oh, yeah.
I do think, as with like a lot of the military history and whatnot here, the idea is that things are always a bit more complex than A versus B. And the Sakoku policies were, nominally no exports or trade to, block Christian spread and whatnot. But they did have, I believe it was Nagasaki, open for Dutch and Chinese traders.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And if I may offer an anecdotal evidence of how just Dutch and Chinese means anyone that the Dutch and Chinese are cool with.
Whoa. How dare you imply that vectors are, in fact, basically representative of everything they come in contact with? Like COVID or something.
Well, a lot of foreign conception of Japan throughout the Sakoku period, of the Edo period and such, came from a book written by German Engelbert Kempfer, real German name.
Oh, yeah.
Who was in Japan in the late 17th century because he had connections. So, like, yeah, there was a significant amount of trade, and I guess, honestly, my background notes for this start with the Battle of Sekigahara, so, I was really into fully contextualizing early 20th century Japan.
What's that book, Lies My Teacher Told Me, or whatever? This is Lies My Wikipedia article told me.
Yeah, I guess other interesting notes about the end of the Edo period, the Bakumatsu, if you will, is that a lot of the political economy stuff was actually Basically, in an attempt to stabilize their economy that was falling apart constantly for 200 years, they started monopolizing things. So, you know, exclusive rights to specific merchants kind of stuff. So a lot of like gold trade and whatnot, I guess, would be interesting to look further into exactly like how they were handling the rights and whatnot towards, I guess that'd be mid 19th century.
Yeah, that would be a good thing to look into.
My personal question of the period is, why the hell did the Shinsengumi care?
That is a good question. If anime is anything to go off of, it seems like they just have a like mental illness that makes them obsessed with punishing evildoers.
Well, they were cops.
Yeah.
But also they were samurai, and samurai were like mostly poor at the time.
Okay.
They lived off stipends that were essentially established at the beginning of the Tokugawa shogunate, and things changed.
and things changed. The understatement of the fucking last 5 centuries. Yeah. So then after they were like the pinnacle of Japanese power in society, I don't know, things changed, and they got really into poetry and philosophy, but mostly it was about them and how they should be at the pinnacle of power in society. And then they got owned by some boats. And so then they were like, so things changed some more, and they decided to change their haircut as well.
Yeah, no, that's basically the cliff notes of it.
And they became like businessmen instead.
My point is, the big, strong, cool samurai character in Golden Kamuy was Shinsengumi, and why did they become cops? Like, they became farmers, and it was good. They all should have just become farmers.
Yeah, agreed. Well, but different cast, right? So, yeah.
Well, they had to lower themselves to become farmers, but who cares?
Right.
I don't think it was that much lower though, because I think it was like samurai and then farmers and
then
like
merchants
and Burakumin were at the bottom.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I think there was something between like peasants and merchants. They were like the merchants were like very low class.
It was like artisans or something.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We didn't even really get to the Russo-Japanese War stuff either.
Yeah.
So I think if I come back to this, I want to do a little bit of detail on the Meiji Restoration, especially because they start mentioning like the whatever they call the founding fathers type characters of the Meiji Restoration history. They're mentioned a lot, and the 3 revolutionaries that pop up later in the story are compared to them like a lot. And there's a much more complex history than I knew about.
Yeah, that's why I started with Sekigahara.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, honestly, we could just do like a whole episode on explaining why the Russo-Japanese War happened.
Yes, which I was about to say, I think we should do that.
Yeah.
Or at least I should. I don't know. But yeah, so I guess we just have to cut it off, basically. Kris, did you have any last thoughts you wanted to add?
Not really. I was just going to try to like go for like
explain the whole Russian,
like a total filibuster.
Japanese war.
Yeah, right. So you got to understand. No, I'm not going to do that. Nothing really to add. Especially considering we're really trying to just focus this on the Golden Kamuy and Ainu history and their political tensions and stuff. Yeah, I don't really have much to add.
Just has all the forces of history in it. That's the problem.
Yeah. Yep. It's what plants crave. But I was gonna say, like, I was really hoping that there would be more information in all these fucking books I have about Japan. But the Ainu do have the unfortunate situation of being basically like not even written out of history, but like unwritten out of history. There's like a few mentions of them, mostly to do with just their armed conflicts with the Japanese early in the, it's literally just in the 700s and stuff, and not much else. And I'm like, oh damn, like shit, I guess I'm just not going to learn much about them. I'm just going to, unless I learn Polish.
Well, they basically have the same problem as with all cool languages of they didn't develop a writing system.
Right.
So they didn't have anything to write history down with, and until they were like forced to. And so now they just use katakana,
Right.
with like 2 extra letters. So that's the main reason they don't have much written history that we know about.
Right.
But I do have 3 books in the notes that I've been reading through that seem good, that are in English. I basically like went and looked for every single book on LibGen with Ainu in the title, and so I found a few that are useful. So I'm going to share the show notes, obviously, like I always do. So if you're interested to read more, check those books out. They are free because they're pirated. And yeah, I guess we should just wrap it up before we keep talking. So thanks everyone for listening. Thank you, Kris and Una, for coming on and talking about this with me. Holy shit. I need to eat.
Yeah. I guess all I can really conclude with is I wish I knew more. Oh shit. Oh fuck! Kill him!
That's
Kill
it.
him! Okay.